Wherever you're listening from today, I really just want to start by offering a genuine, divine blessing for your day and, for the entire week ahead of you. May it be full of insight and peace.
Yeah, absolutely. And insight is exactly what we are chasing today.
It really is.
Yeah.
So I want you to picture this. You're a sentry, right? Standing on the thick, fortified walls of an ancient Middle Eastern stronghold.
Just kind of scanning the horizon.
Exactly. And you've heard all these terrifying rumors about a massive nomadic army approaching. An army whose gods supposedly, parted a sea and devastated an entire empire.
Which is terrifying.
Right. So you look out over the horizon and you see the dust cloud. Your heart is just pounding. You grip your spear, bracing for the inevitable barrage of arrows, the battering rams, the brutal reality of an ancient siege.
The standard protocol for warfare back then.
Exactly. And then the army arrives. They form a neat line. They take a completely silent lap around your city, and then they just go back to their camp.
Just pack it up and go home for the day.
Yeah. Nothing but the sound of footsteps and, a few ram's horns. So today, we're taking a deep dive into what might be the most elaborate psychological operation of the ancient world, the biblical Battle of Jericho.
It's such a fascinating event because it really is a narrative that just defies all conventional military logic. I mean, we're analyzing this account by cross-referencing some pretty comprehensive archaeological data with the linguistic and historical context.
Right, relying on our primary sources for this deep dive, which include the Holman and NAA study Bibles.
Yeah, looking at exactly where ancient theology intersects with the literal dirt and rubble of the ancient Near East.
Because when you dig into the source material, you realize pretty quickly this isn't, it's not just that simple Sunday school story of marching and tooting horns that, a lot of us grew up with.
No, not at all.
It's this really profound study in absolute obedience. It's a masterclass in psychological tension. And it happens to sit at the absolute epicenter of a fierce, century-old archaeological debate.
It's highly contested ground, for sure.
Right. So our mission today is to figure out the profound why behind those falling walls. And to do that, I think we have to start with the environment inside the city before a single Israelite boot even hit the sand. The text explicitly describes Jericho as being tightly shut.
Yeah, and that phrase carries immense weight. The city is in a state of just total lockdown. I mean, no one went out and no one came in.
Complete isolation.
Exactly. And geographically, Jericho was an oasis. So it had this incredibly robust water supply from a nearby spring, which meant they were actually really well equipped to wait out a long siege.
Like they were ready for the long haul.
Right. They had food, they had water, and they had these massive, imposing walls. But that physical description of being tightly shut, it also operates as a mirror for their spiritual state.
Oh, totally. It's this physical manifestation of total resistance. I mean, the people of Jericho, they were well aware of the Israelites.
They knew exactly who was outside.
Right. The text tells us they had heard what happened in Egypt decades prior. They knew about the recent victories across the Jordan River. And their response wasn't diplomatic at all.
No parley, no negotiations.
Exactly. Their response was basically to board up the windows, lock the heavy wooden gates, and just dare this desert army to try and break through.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the battle plan God delivers to Joshua. And, I mean, to any military commander in the late Bronze Age, this plan would have sounded entirely irrational.
Oh, completely crazy.
Yeah, Joshua is instructed to take his armed men and just march around the city. Not attack, just, march. Once a day for 6 days.
Just a stroll.
Right, and they're to be accompanied by 7 priests blowing 7 ram's horn trumpets. And, this is crucial, they are to carry the Ark of the Covenant with them.
Well, and let's pause on the Ark for a second, because I think a lot of times we just think of it as like an ornate gold box being paraded around.
Right, like a fancy prop.
Yeah, but in the context of ancient Israel, the Ark was the literal throne of God. It represented the tangible, holy presence of the divine. So Joshua isn't just sending a scouting party here.
No, he is bringing the very presence of God to the front line of a hostile conflict.
Which changes the entire dynamic of the siege.
Yeah.
But the psychological component you mentioned earlier, that is perhaps the most fascinating tactical choice to me.
The silence.
Yes. Joshua gives this specific, incredibly difficult command to the fighting men regarding how they are to conduct this march. He commands total, unbroken silence.
Yeah, it's intense.
He literally tells them, you shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout.
Which is just wild to think about.
I just try to imagine the sheer self-control that it requires. We're talking about thousands of armed soldiers. Normally, an ancient army would be, like, hyping themselves up, right?
Oh, yeah, banging their weapons against their shields, screaming insults at the city walls to intimidate the enemy. It was all about making noise.
But instead, Joshua imposes this eerie, agonizing silence. The only sounds are the rhythmic crunch of sandals on dirt and the continuous haunting wail of those 7 rams' horns.
It creates a unique kind of sensory torture for the inhabitants of Jericho. I mean, think about it. If an army attacks you, you can fight back. Adrenaline takes over.
You react.
Right. But if an army just silently circles you day after day, it forces you to just sit with your own dread.
Like a psychological pressure cooker.
Exactly. You are watching a fuse burn, but you have no idea where it leads or when the explosion is coming.
And the discipline required from the Israelites there, it just highlights a really profound level of obedience.
Yeah.
But looking at the study Bible sources, there's another layer here beyond just military intimidation, and that's, well, the heavy reliance on the number 7.
The sevens are everywhere in this narrative.
Right. 7 priests, 7 trumpets, 7 days, and on that final day, 7 laps around the city.
And that repetition isn't just for dramatic effect, In biblical literature, the number 7 is the ultimate symbol of perfection, divine completion, and covenant.
It's the most important number.
Yeah. And what's brilliant here is the timing. Our sources point out that this event takes place immediately after the Israelites have crossed the Jordan River and celebrated the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Oh, right, which was a 7-day festival commemorating their escape from slavery in Egypt.
Precisely. So this subsequent 7-day march around Jericho, it really functions as a theological continuation. It's the conclusion of that narrative arc.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. The same God who initiated their deliverance from Egypt with a 7-day feast is now, completely and perfectly executing their entry into the Promised Land with a 7-day march.
That is incredible. And that brings us to the climax on the 7th day. So they don't just do their usual morning lap, they march around the city 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
The physical exhaustion is setting in. The anticipation inside and outside the walls is just stretched to the absolute breaking point. And finally, Joshua breaks the week-long silence. The trumpets blow a long, sustained blast, and Joshua orders the army to shout.
And this is where the linguistic insights from the Holman study materials really open up the text, because the Hebrew word translated as shout, there is haria.
Yeah, and reading through the analysis of haria in the notes, I realized my modern concept of a shout completely misses the mark.
How so?
Well, I just think of yelling at a television screen during a football game, like just making noise. But this ancient word carries so much more weight than that.
Oh, it is incredibly layered. I mean, depending on the context in ancient Hebrew literature, haria can describe a fierce, blood-curdling war cry.
Like something meant to paralyze an enemy with fear.
Exactly. Or, alternatively, it can function as a massive, urgent alarm. But it is also frequently used to describe a thunderous shout of jubilation, like a communal roar of absolute praise and joy.
Meaning, at the walls of Jericho, it acts as a war cry and a worship anthem simultaneously.
It's an earth-shattering collision of both. I mean, it is the lethal battle cry of an invading force, but because they have been promised the victory before the battle even began, it is also the jubilant praise of a people who know the outcome is already secured.
Man, put yourself in the sandals of one of those soldiers. You've bitten your tongue for 6 days.
6 long days.
You've stared up at these impenetrable mud brick walls, feeling the heat, feeling the hostility radiating from the city guards. The tension, it's coiled so tight in your chest.
And then you finally get the green light.
Right. You're finally given the command to let it all out. The physical and emotional release of 100,000 voices unleashing that haria all at once, it must have been deafening.
And according to the narrative, the result of that sound is immediate, catastrophic structural failure. The text states the walls fall down flat and the people go straight up into the city.
Which naturally leads to the most pressing question for anyone studying this today, right? What actually happened physically?
Right, the archaeology.
Because Jericho is not some mythical realm. It is a very real geographic location known today as Tel Es-Sultan. And the topography itself is wild. It sits about 229 meters below sea level.
Making it essentially the lowest city on the surface of the planet.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, and because of that vital water source we mentioned earlier, it is incredibly ancient. It has been built destroyed, and rebuilt in layers for millennia, forming this massive mound or a tell.
Just layer upon layer of history.
Exactly. This makes it an absolute goldmine for archaeologists. Over the last century, there have been several major historic excavations there. You've got Ernst Sellen and Carl Watzinger digging in the early 1900s, John Garstang in the 1930s, and then Kathleen Kenyon conducted a highly influential dig in the 1950s.
And what they found beneath the dirt perfectly illustrates the defensive capabilities of the city. I mean,
Right.
we aren't talking about a simple wooden palisade fence here.
Far from it.
The excavations revealed a really sophisticated double wall system. There was a massive stone retaining wall at the base of the mound, and then built on top of that stone foundation was a towering wall made entirely of mud bricks.
Right. And the mechanism of how those mud bricks fell is where the archaeology provides this stunning parallel to the biblical text.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, when a mud brick wall collapses naturally over time, or say even from an earthquake, you'd expect it to crumble inward or just disintegrate in place,
So
right?
it fall down onto itself.
But the excavation showed that the mud brick superstructure of this specific wall fell outward and tumbled down the steep slope of the mound.
Which actually solves a massive logistical problem for the biblical account.
Right.
Because if an ancient army wants to get into a fortified city on a hill, a collapsed wall still presents a massive pile of rubble they have to climb over,
Right.
while being shot at, no less.
Exactly. It's still an obstacle.
But because the mud bricks fell outward, over the top of the lower stone retaining wall, they literally formed a solid ramp.
A ramp straight up into the city.
Right. It perfectly aligns with the specific phrasing in the text. The wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him. The physical evidence provides the exact ramp necessary for an infantry charge.
It's a remarkable convergence of archaeology and text, for sure. We also find a massive destruction layer of ash and burned debris, nearly 3 feet thick in some places.
Wow, 3 feet.
Yeah, and it's full of jars that were still packed with grain, which confirms the city was heavily fortified, fully stocked from the recent spring harvest, and violently burned in a very short siege. I mean, nobody even had time to eat the food.
Okay, so if the evidence is literally sitting right there in the dirt, outward fallen walls, the massive fire, the inconsumed grain, why is there still such a fierce debate? Because I read through the notes, and there are brilliant scholars who completely dismiss the idea that this matches the biblical Joshua. Why isn't this just an open and shut case?
Well, the core of the controversy isn't really about what happened to the city. The violent destruction and the fallen walls are clearly visible in the stratigraphy, the layered timeline of the dirt.
Right, nobody's arguing the walls didn't fall.
Exactly. The intense debate is entirely about when it happened. And to understand the debate, we kind of have to look at how archaeologists actually date these ruins, because they don't just rely on carbon-14 dating.
Right, because in the 1950s, that technology was barely in its infancy, and even today it has margins of error.
Yeah. Instead, they rely really heavily on ceramic typology and scarabs.
Okay, ceramic typology, meaning pottery, right? Because pottery is essentially the plastic of the ancient world.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
The style of a clay pot changes from century to century. So if you find a specific type of handle or like a painted design, you can use it like a timestamp for the soil layer it was buried in.
Exactly. So John Garstang, when he was excavating in the 30s, he found a specific type of local pottery and Egyptian scarabs.
And scarabs are those small beetle-shaped amulets, often bearing the name of a reigning pharaoh, right?
Yes. And based on the pharaohs named on those scarabs, Garstang dated the fiery destruction of this wall to around 1400 BC, so the end of the late Bronze Age. And this timeline perfectly accommodates a traditional literal reading of the biblical Exodus and Joshua's conquest.
Okay, but then Kathleen Kenyon comes along in the 50s. She digs in a different section of the mound and completely upends Garstang's timeline.
She really did. Kenyon introduced much more rigorous stratigraphic methods, but she based her dating largely on what she didn't find.
Oh, interesting.
She looked for a very specific, expensive imported pottery called Cypriot bichromeware, which was common in the late Bronze Age, but she didn't find it in the destruction layer.
So what did she conclude from that?
She concluded the destruction must have happened much earlier, around 1550 BC, and was likely carried out by the Egyptians.
Got it. Which would mean that by the time Joshua and the Israelites arrived in the 1400s or 1300s, Jericho was literally nothing but an abandoned, eroded ruin.
Correct. Her analysis suggested the biblical narrative was essentially an origin myth invented centuries later just to explain a ruined city.
Wow. Okay.
Now, later scholars have challenged Kenyon on this. They point out that she dug in a poorer sector of the city where expensive imported pottery wouldn't really be found anyway, right? While local wares that do match the 1400 BC date were actually present.
So it's still unsettled.
Very much so. The debate goes back and forth, and it's entirely dependent on how one interprets these fragments of clay and microscopic changes in carbon isotopes. It's important to remember we are just reporting on what the different scholars argue here.
Of course. It's a brilliant reminder that archaeology rarely provides us with clean, undisputed math. It requires a lot of interpretation.
Absolutely.
But regardless of where scholars land on the timeline, anyone reading this text has to confront what actually took place inside those walls once they fell. And I have to admit, reading through the source material, I kept snagging on the moral implications of the aftermath.
It's a difficult text.
It is. Joshua declares that the city, and literally everything breathing inside it, is condemned to total destruction.
Yes. The Hebrew term used for this concept is kerem. It is usually translated as devoted to destruction or the ban. And honestly, without understanding the cultural and theological context of kerem, the narrative just reads like an endorsement of ancient, indiscriminate massacre.
Yeah, my modern sensibilities immediately recoiled at it,
Understandably.
But digging into the cultural context really shifts the perspective. Because this wasn't standard ancient pillaging where an army sacks a city just to enrich themselves. This was a highly specific theological judgment.
Right. The biblical text portrays Canaanite culture at this time as being steeped in profound, systemic violence and idolatry. We're talking about practices that included child sacrifice and intense exploitation.
Just horrific stuff.
Yeah, so the concept of kerem functioned as a definitive divine surgery, basically, to remove that corruption. But there is also a secondary structural reason why Jericho specifically was devoted to total destruction. Jericho represented the first fruits of the Israelite campaign in Canaan.
Ah, okay. And in ancient biblical law, the first fruits of any harvest, the first crops, the first livestock, they always belong exclusively to God. You don't get to consume them yourself.
Precisely. Therefore, the entire city was declared kerem, holy, untouchable, and devoted entirely to the Lord's treasury.
Which completely explains the bizarre command Joshua gives his men regarding the plunder. He tells them they're absolutely forbidden from taking any loot.
No pocketing silver coins.
Right. No taking a fine garment for their own tents. All the durable goods, the gold, silver, bronze, and iron, they were strictly consecrated.
And to understand how seriously they took this, consider the metaphor of radiation. The goods of Jericho were spiritually radioactive. They belonged to a realm of divine judgment.
Wow. Radioactive.
Yeah, Joshua basically warns that if any soldier takes something devoted to destruction, they will inadvertently bring that exact same curse of destruction upon the entire Israelite camp. To take the plunder was to align yourself with the rebellion of Jericho.
The absolute severity of that judgment really makes the one exception in the story shine so much brighter, I think. Because amidst the ash and the fallen walls, there is an incredible display of radical mercy. Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute, and her entire family are spared.
Yes, they are brought out of the burning city entirely unharmed. And specifically because she had hidden the Israelite spies when they scouted the city weeks prior.
Right.
She'd heard the same rumors of the Israelite God as everyone else in Jericho, but instead of locking her doors in defiance, she recognized God's authority and acted in faith to protect the spies.
And there is a statistical breakdown in the Holman notes regarding Rahab that I found absolutely staggering. When you look at the original Hebrew text, you can actually count where the author places their focus.
The linguistic weight there is fascinating. The author dedicates exactly 102 Hebrew words to describing the catastrophic fiery destruction of the fortress of Jericho.
Okay, 102 words.
But right alongside that, there are 86 words dedicated entirely to detailing the salvation of Rahab and her family.
That's crazy. The rescue of one marginalized woman, a prostitute on the absolute edge of Canaanite society, is given almost the exact same narrative real estate as the collapse of one of the greatest ancient strongholds on Earth.
It reveals the true heartbeat of the text, The narrative does not shy away from severe divine judgment against entrenched rebellion, but it simultaneously insists on the staggering reach of divine mercy.
Like holding both in tension.
Exactly. It makes a clear theological statement. Anyone, regardless of their nationality, their past, or their social standing, who aligns themselves with God finds salvation, even as the walls are literally collapsing around them.
It's just an incredible contrast.
Yeah.
But the shadow of Jericho doesn't just dissipate once the smoke clears.
Yeah.
Joshua stands over the rubble and he pronounces this chilling curse. He essentially issues a divine building ban on the site.
He does.
He says that anyone who tries to rebuild Jericho will lay its foundation at the cost of his firstborn son and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest.
It's a decree meant to leave the ruins as a permanent physical scar on the landscape, a monument to God's judgment. But as we know, human arrogance has a really short memory.
Oh, for sure.
The NAA Study Bible actually draws a direct line from Joshua's curse to its tragic fulfillment centuries later, during the 9th century BC.
Right. A man named Heel the Bethelite looks at the cursed ruins and basically decides his own ambition is greater than a centuries-old warning. He decides he's going to fix it.
And the historical record in 1 Kings 16 documents the result. Hal rebuilt Jericho, but he laid its foundation at the cost of his firstborn, Abiram, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub.
Exactly, fulfilling Joshua's prophecy.
Yeah. It demonstrates that when you attempt to build your own kingdom on top of something God has explicitly condemned, the personal cost is just unimaginably high.
It's a sobering reality check to close out a narrative of victory. So when we pull all this together, the strategy of silence, the fallen mud bricks, the fierce timeline debate, and the incredible rescue of Rahab, we have to ask how this translates to a listener today.
Right, what's the takeaway? I think if we synthesize the historical and theological elements, the core lesson is really the dynamic tension between a divine promise and human obedience.
Unpack that a little.
Well, God assured Joshua on day one that the city was already given into his hand. The victory was guaranteed. But that guarantee didn't mean the Israelites could just sit in their tents and wait for an earthquake to do the work.
Right, it required action,
Mm-hmm.
but a highly specific, agonizingly disciplined kind of action.
Exactly. They had to subordinate their human logic, their desire to just attack the problem head on, to a strategy that required them to walk in absolute silence until the precise moment God commanded them to shout.
And that is exactly the thought I want to leave you with today. Because we live in a culture that conditions us to react instantaneously. When we face an obstacle, a situation in our life that feels tightly shut, our immediate instinct is to shout at it.
To force our way through.
Right, or to complain loudly to anyone who will listen.
Mm-hmm.
But look at the discipline of the Israelites here. What would it look like in your own life to silently and patiently circle a massive problem? What would it look like to restrain your urge to force a quick solution and instead wait obediently for the right moment to let out that huria?
It's a vital perspective because the walls didn't come down on the first day. They came down after a week of silent perseverance.
Exactly. Sometimes the most difficult work we can do is the quiet, restrained faithfulness that precedes the falling walls. We really hope this deep dive has provided you with some new lenses to view this ancient history, not just as an archaeological debate, but as a map of human nature and divine strategy. Thank you so much for taking the time to explore this with us. Remember, whatever walls you're facing today, God blesses all of you listening. Have a wonderful week.